Mixed emotions in Iran and Lebanon today. Talk of more war with Iran started the day off, and then peace was imminent, and then in the next moment it was back to more war. A lot of stuff going on, very hard to follow, but we will start in order of those events. And earlier today, the US started things off by warning of strikes on Iran's power plants. Again, if a deal wasn't struck. Casual war crime teasing, whatever. Israel also joined in on the threats. Its defense minister said that Iran was standing on the brink of abyss. And if Iran did not do a deal with the US, even more painful strikes were on the way. Don't forget, US warships are also approaching Iran. If this all sounds very familiar, I'm pretty sure I've been making reports like this for the last 3 months, 4 months maybe. Since December, actually. But the mood shifted later on when Trump announced a 10-day ceasefire between Lebanon and Israel. The details were murky, not least because ceasefire in Trump land often means very little. And also, what exactly is a 10-day ceasefire? Is it actually a path to peace? Or is it just a chance for people to rearm? In the cases of Gaza's ceasefire, for example, strikes on Gaza have continued on a near daily basis. Some critics actually call it a zombie ceasefire. So to be blunt, ceasefire doesn't always mean much with this administration, but surely it is still good news. Well, we understand that not everyone was happy about it from both sides. Hezbollah in Lebanon wanted more reassurance, in particular that Israel would leave the south and that it would have no freedom of movement in the land that Israel has taken, land that Israel now calls its buffer zone. Opposition politicians in Israel were also unhappy, saying that nothing had been done to protect Israelis in its north if Hezbollah was still around. Opposition claimed that Israel's Prime Minister had now failed in all of his war objectives, which were, of course, to replace Iran's leadership and to remove Hezbollah, the threat for them in Lebanon. Israel later said that it had no plan to move troops out of South Lebanon. And quite frankly, why would you? If it's only going on for 10 days, the operation of moving the troops out and then moving them back in when the war presumably restarts would seem quite pointless from Israel's perspective. You also can't waste all of that hard work. Israel had reportedly destroyed the last bridge in South Lebanon, linking it to the rest of Lebanon. And when you look at the wording of the ceasefire, it doesn't sound that convincing. The deal was described as a goodwill gesture by Israel, which is okay, but it also mentioned that Israel had the right to defend itself at any time against planned, imminent, or ongoing attacks. That means that if Israel does carry out a strike on Lebanon, it can be justified as saying, well, there was knowledge, there was intel of something that might have happened. So, not that convinced, me personally. But there was one happy person commenting on all of this. Of course, it was President Trump of America. He said that this was the 10th war that he had solved. We also saw the Secretary of War give a statement about the current situation. He said that the US controlled the Strait of Hormuz, which it kind of does, even as airlines across the world warned that many flights would have to be cancelled in 6 weeks due to a lack of jet fuel. You might be wondering, why can they not get jet fuel? Oh, never mind. The Secretary of War also vented his anger at the media and presumably voices like my own. He said, "I just can't help notice the endless stream of garbage, relentlessly negative coverage of the Iran war. Translation: why are you not speaking about war in a more positive way? I want to see confetti and rainbows and interpretive dance. Yay, war! But then he said something that I found interesting, something that all wartime leaders say when things are not going to plan. He said, sometimes it's hard to figure out what side some of you are actually on. It's incredibly unpatriotic. The last word here is very telling. Unpatriotic. It's a disguised way of saying don't criticize this war, or you are a traitor. When a wartime leader struggles to actually win a war or complete its objectives, they start trying to control what they can. And if they can't control what's going on in the country they are seeking to topple, they then go for the voices in their own country. Voices of dissent at home. This is a historical thing that happens pretty much in all wars. It wasn't just the American critics that America's Secretary of War had beef with, though. It was his Western allies too. He accused Europe of standing back while America did the so-called heavy lifting. Our allies weren't there for us, he complained. I think Europe has a good enough reason to be hesitant. There has been a track record over the last 20 years of America telling Europe to get in line with American wars. Don't forget, I think it was Article 5 of NATO, the attack on one is an attack on all. That has only ever been triggered once. America triggered it to get into the Middle Eastern wars 20 years ago. But who picks up the dust from a war that leads to an immigration crisis? Who gets stuck in decade-long investigations about the legality of war? Who is accused of old-school colonialism? Europe, Europe, Europe. So can you blame them? America, I think, made two miscalculations in this war. One of the miscalculations was that America did not think that Iran would close the Strait of Hormuz. Now for this, I don't entirely blame the administration. Some of you might, but I can see why they didn't think Iran would close it. I think last year's 12-day war in Iran was a rehearsal for the US and Israel. It was to see how Iran reacted in conflict, how they behaved in the event of war. For the US and Israel, the 12-day war was a simulation to learn from for when the real war started. Less than a year later, of course. And at the time, Iran did not close the Strait of Hormuz. So when war planners would have sat down with Trump and said, hey, they might close the Strait of Hormuz, it's easy to see why Trump didn't believe it. Well, they didn't do it last time, so why would they do it now? Secondly, it was underestimating, that's the next miscalculation, underestimating how little support Europe would give to the US. I think that links to point one, that America didn't think the strait would be a problem and that European help would therefore not be needed. But, as we know, Spain refused airspace to the Americans for warfare use. The UK was unsure whether the US could use the air bases. Italy denied rights for some of its air bases. Austria denied US overflight requests. Switzerland said no because, well, Switzerland, neutral, long-standing policy. And in some cases, countries were actually quite critical, even in the UK, which always prides itself over having a special relationship with the US. The UK Chancellor has called the war folly, with no exit plan. Both the UK and Germany have said, this isn't our war. You might be thinking to yourself, come on USA, read the room. But critics would say that Europe is not reading the room, that Europe doesn't understand the gravity of the situation. Iran is bad. Americans and Israelis will often say that Iran was just weeks away from building a nuclear bomb. They cite Iran's awful treatment of protesters earlier on in this year, and past instances too. Even critics of the war that don't want Europe to get involved, they do admit that actually, yes, Iran is not a country that we particularly support. You wouldn't want to get on the wrong side of Iran. And these videos are by no means a defense of Iran either. I've covered the Ukrainian conflict with Russia in great detail, and it is Iran's drones that have haunted Ukrainian skies for years, making the average Ukrainian person's life in Ukraine very miserable. You might struggle to find Ukrainians who are sympathetic to Iran. And likewise, I also remember the protests in Iran a few years ago and the way protesters back then were treated. It was abysmal. You could easily argue, whatever side you're on, that leadership change in Iran, maybe not the worst idea for the West, but like this, Israel has been saying that Iran is weeks away from building a nuclear bomb since the late 1990s. You can search it up. There's video evidence of Israel's current Prime Minister telling the US that Iran would have it by summer, 25 years ago. A former high-ranking US official also said that Israel's Prime Minister used to visit new presidents and do slideshow presentations on why war with Iran was a good idea. Obama said no. Biden said no. Trump has said yes, but argues it was still a good idea. But why? Trump was supposed to be the anti-war president. No more foreign wars, remember? No more holidays in the Middle East. Last year, in the 12-day war, the rehearsal as I call it, Trump proudly said that he'd taken out Iran's nuclear capability. And when the media said, actually, we don't think you have, he said that was, you guessed it, unpatriotic. So why go back in? Well, I have to accept my limits. I don't have access to US government information. I'm not a spy, I'm just a guy with a camera. Maybe they have secret insider knowledge that no other country has. For Trump, who prided himself on being anti-war, the decision to go to war, and arguably one of the biggest wars America's been in, for 2 decades at least, has to have had a big reason. But has this war been successful? It's hardly a resounding yes. Let's be honest, whatever side you're on, there has been no regime change. Iran still has its proxies. Iran can still launch rockets at the Gulf. And the only thing that has changed in Iran is that Iran is angrier and the Strait of Hormuz is now closed when it was open a few months ago. But when I post these videos on different social media platforms, my comment sections fill up with people telling me America has won the war. Of course, to do otherwise would be unpatriotic.